Good morning, learner. In the previous lecture, we discussed the different way of classifying the research, and today we will move up one step further to understand how research is classified based on method, particularly analytical research. The analytical research is a type of research where the researcher does not just describe the data, but analyze the data, interpret the data, critically evaluate the data, and it to draw the meaningful conclusions. Unlike the descriptive research, which focus on what is happening, because the descriptive research focus of the current situation in existence, but in the case of analytical research, try to answer why it happening and how it's happening. Important thing is the descriptive research to focus on the current situation, and analytical research find out the why it is happening and how it is happening. This is an important concept. The next important thing, the basic classification of research. The research is classified on the basis of purpose, approach, and now we discussed about on the basis of methods. The next important thing is in the main type of research by methods, the descriptive research, analytical research, experimental research, historical research, and survey research. So this session we will discuss about the analytical research. In today's lectures, we will now the focus on one is an important research based on method, which is analytical research. This type of research goes beyond the simple description and involve a deeper examination of data to understand the relationship, causes, and underlying what kind of the pattern is going on. The important thing is the analytical research is concerned with the critical evaluation, interpretation of existing information of data, because we have the data, and on the basis of data we go for the critical evaluation and interpretation with the help of analytical research. The researcher used the logical reasoning, statistical tool, analytical technique to draw a specific meaningful conclusion that will help to achieve your specific goal in the form of research. Instead of just the collecting of data, this research emphasis on analyzing and explaining the data scientifically, because the research is scientific plan, a systematic process, and analytical research generally used to collect the data, analyze the data, and interpret the data scientifically. For example, in the field of physical education and sports, if we collect the data on athlete, just like the performance, the analytical research help us to determine why some athlete perform better than the others, because we collect the data so many athlete, some athlete perform better, some athletes perform not good. So with the help of analytical data and research, we try to find out what kind of reasons behind all this. It is important thing to find out the answer of why. So whether it is due to the training intensity, for example, body composition, psychological factor, effect of the performance, the group A and between the group 2. So thus the analytical research is a systematic logical approach that helps in the making the decision, improving the performance, and developing the scientific understanding in sports and education, especially in the field of physical education. This is the flow chart of the analytical research. First important thing is the analytical research is a type of research that use existing fact or information. They apply the logical and statistical analysis to examine a problem in detail and draw the specific type of the conclusion. Important thing with this, number one is the identify the problem. First step is analytical research to select the problem. Define the research problem clearly. This is based of your need or your relevance. And after that we go for the review of related literature. Important thing is the study and evaluate the existence literature, reports, theories related to your problem. So first you find out the problems and the studies, the related studies of your problems, and find out the reports and theories which is related to your problem. Next is the collecting the existing data. Means gathering the relevant data from just like the book, journal, reports, database, record, and other secondary sources. The first important thing is collecting the existing data. And after that we analyze the data through different kind of the statistical technique, and then you can interpret the result. To interpret the analyze the data and determining the pattern, relationship and its application in the field of physical education and sport, for example. And after that we go for the conclusion, to draw the specific type of conclusion of your research. Okay, what is the conclusion of your research and your problems. The important thing is the analytical research having some key features. Number one, it uses based on existent fact and information. This is very important things. You should be careful, that is analytical research is based on existing data or fact and informations. Next important thing is this analytical research is based on involving critical analysis and logical reasoning. We can analyze critically of the existence data. Next thing is the analytical research help to examine the problem in depth, because we collect the primary and secondary data, save time and resources, because this will helpful go for the analytical research, provide a reliable and objective conclusion of your research. And this is an important thing. This type of research widely used in the field of management, in the field of sports, in the field of physical education and social sciences. Next thing, the meaning of analytical research. The important thing, how you can understand of this. So let us to understand the meaning of analytical research. This is very important concept, especially in the research process and methodology. So analytical research refers to a type of research in which a researcher analyze existing fact. Important thing is existing facts you can analyze, that is called the analytical research or information. In order to, you can analyze the existing information, existent fact. Important thing is in order to evaluate the relationship, causes and pattern. To we find some type of causes, we find some type of relationship and pattern, and existence data you can analyze the data in order to evaluate the relationship, cause and pattern. In a simple term, the researcher does not just collect the data but carefully examine it to understand what actually means, what actually data speak. Next important things is goes beyond a simple description. The meaning of analytical research is very important, or it is important to note the analytical research. It just goes beyond these simple descriptions, because it's involve the logical reasoning and interpretation. It descriptive, in just like the descriptive research, we only answer the questions like what is happening, because we just giving the existing situation. But in analytical research we try to answer why it is happening. So the important thing is the thing is happening. Just in descriptive research we find out that this is things that happen, but through the analytical research we try to find out why these things happen. So this is the link between the descriptive and analytical research. Next important is focus of critical examination, interpretation of data. So this type of research focus of critical examination and interpretation of different data. So researcher use logical thinking, sometimes statistical tool to draw the meaningful conclusion. Just like, let us take an example from the physical education. Suppose we collect the data on the student fitness level, such as strength, endurance, flexibility. In descriptive research, for example, we may simply report that some students have higher endurance than the others. But important thing in the analytical research, we go further and ask, why do some students perform better? It is due to the regular training, diet and lifestyle. So here we are analyzing the relationship between the variables such as training and performance. Next important thing is the understanding the causes and relationship between the variables. So analytical research helps us to understand the cause and relationship between the different type of variable, which is very useful, especially in the for physical education, sports, training method and overall physical fitness. In short, analytical research is not just about the data collection. It is about thinking deeply, analyze scientifically and draw the meaningful conclusion from the existing information. And we have some definition of it. Analytical research is analytical studies involve careful evaluation, interpretation, existing information to explain the relationship among the variables. Just like this definition clearly inside three important points. Number one is emphasize the careful evaluation of data. That is means careful evaluation, meaning the researcher must examine the information in a systematic and scientific way. Second important thing in the research is the interpretation of existing information, the existing information, which means we do not just collect the data, but we try to understand is that what data speak and what data is telling. And third important aspect, the explaining the relationship among the variable, which is core analytical research. This means, so this definition reminds us that the analytical research is not about the data collection, observation and record the current situation, but also deep analysis, logical reasoning and understanding the connection between the different factors. In this slide, we have the some objective which is used in the analytical research. Generally, analytical research having some objectives. First is the analyze the existing data. Main objective of analytical research is, this means researcher work with the already available data such as performance record, fitness score or match statistics and examine it in a scientific manner. Next important thing is to identify the relationship. In analytical research, we try to find out how one factor is related to the another factor. For instance, we may study the relationship between the training during and athletic performance. We may study this like the relationship between the training duration and athletic performance, or between the body composition and speed, just like interpretation pattern of trend. This involves the observing how the data behave over time across the group. For example, if we notice that the student who practice regularly show continuous improvement and in strength, this indicates as a clear trend. Next important thing, to test theoretical explanations. It means analytical research helps us to check whether a theory or assumption is correct or not. Important thing. So overall objective show the analytical research is not just about the collecting data, but about the understanding the relationship, identify the trend and testing the scientific ideas, so especially in the field of physical education and sports. Next important thing, the characteristic of analytical research. First is use existing data, record research findings. This is the characteristics the students and dear learner. One important characteristic of analytical research is that is use existing data. Important thing is use existing data, record previous researches, findings instead of collecting and new data. The important thing with the analytical research means you use existing data or previous data. In this research, the researcher carefully studies and analyzes the information that is already available in the books, research paper, reports or record, government document and previous studies. So the main purpose is to understand the relationship, identify the pattern and draw the meaningful conclusion from the available resources and information and data. Next is the involve the critical thinking and interpretation. Dear learner, another important characteristics of the analytical research is involve the critical thinking, and important thing is the interpretation. In this type of research, a researcher does not simply collect the information but carefully examine, compare, interpret the available data to understand its meaning, to what data speak. The critical thinking means the analyzing the information logically. Important thing is identify the relationship, finding the strength and weakness, and draw a proper conclusion based on the available data or evidences. Next important thing, they involve the critical thinking. For example, a researcher studies previous researches on the effect of exercise on mental health. The research carefully compare the different findings, examine which studies show the positive effect, and interpret why certain results may differ. So this is the process to involve the critical thinking in analytical research. Next is the focus on cause and effect relationship. This means a researcher have the data, current data, previous data. So this means the researcher try to understand whether one factor cause a change in another factors. So in simple word, the researcher studies what happened when a particular variable is changed. So this is through the analytical research we find out the cause and relationship. Next important thing is the required statistical analysis. Simple, we have the data. If we want to reach any conclusion, we go for the analysis. In analysis and research, the researcher carefully examine, analyze the data to understanding the fact and relationship. Statistical analysis is generally used to organize the data, compare the data, interpret the numerical data and scientifically. Important thing is, just like the logical reasoning help the researcher think critically and draw the meaningful conclusion from the available information on data. The researcher studies the pattern, trends, similarities, differences in data. The conclusion of all these things are made on the basis of evidence, proper analysis rather than the personal opinion and guesswork. The all important thing is we have the data. After data we should go for the analysis and interpretation. After that we go for some conclusion on the basis of scientific evidences. Next important things, oftenly use secondary data sources. Generally we discuss about the analytical research commonly use the secondary data sources. Just the information is available currently or previous information. So secondary data source instead of collecting completely new data. So analytical research generally most commonly use the secondary data. Secondary data means information that has already been collected by other researcher, organization and institution. Next important thing, these sources may include just like the research paper, books, journal, reports, newspaper, government records, surveys, statistical database. All these things process to collect the information from the secondary sources. The researcher analyze and interpret the existence information to understand the research problem. Important thing, the using the secondary data is important things. It will help to you to save your time, your efforts and resources while providing the valuable information for analysis. And method generally used in statistical research, just like statistical analysis, comparative analysis, correlation analysis, regression analysis, secondary data analysis. We had discussed the comparative analysis means. Comparative analysis is a method generally used in analysis research to compare two or more group, situation, studies, set of data. The comparative analysis help the researcher to identify the similarities, differences, strength and weakness between the two compared group. So through the comparison, researcher can better understanding the relationship and it will be helpful to draw the meaningful conclusion. Comparative analysis also useful to evaluating the performance, evaluating the method, evaluating the programs, evaluating the research findings. It also helpful in making informed and logical decision based on comparison of data. On the basis of the data, comparison of data, we should reach a scientific evidence based on conclusion. Just like we giving an example, a researcher compared the performance of athlete trend with two different exercise programs to determine which program is more effective or better. Next important thing, the correlation studies, in which we go for the find out the relationship between the two variables, maybe independent and dependent variables, how these or variables are affected and one variable affect to others. It helped the researcher to understand whether the changes in one variables are related to change in another variables, yes or not. The correlation sometimes maybe nil, it means the positive, sometimes negative, sometimes zero. The positive correlation means the variable increase, another variable decrease together. Negative correlation means one variable increase while the other is decrease. So zero correlation means there is no relation between two. So this is the important things. We're giving some example which is related to the sports and physical education. Researcher study just like the relationship between the practice time and performance. If athletes who practice more perform better, so it shows the positive correlation. Next important thing is regression analysis. In a regression analysis, is a statistical method used to predict the effect of one variable on the another variable through the regression analysis, because you know very well and about of that we have two type of generally variables. One is output variables, that is called the dependent variables, and other is independent variables. So maybe the independent variables so many, and all the independent variables effect of all dependent variables. And so through the regression analysis we try to find out the relationship and how to one the other variables are effect of the other ones. It helps the researcher to understand how changes in independent variables influenced by a dependent variables. It means we can change independent variables and it will be effect on the output variable, that is called a dependent variable. The regression analysis is especially used for the prediction and analysis or forecasting analysis. It shows the strength and direction of relationship between the variable. So researchers generally use of regression analysis to estimate the future outcome based on existing data, because we have the data in today. On the basis of data we have some independent variables and one is output variables. So we try to find out the how we change the independent variables, how these affect on the output variable. So on the basis we can predict the future, so we can change and manipulate the independent variable, and this will also be effect of the output variable. We giving some a simple example, just like a researcher studies how training hours affect the athlete performance score. So using the regression analysis, the researcher can predict performance based on the number of training hours. So you 2 hours trainings you do you performs per day. It is means after 1 month your performance level of this. If you perform 3 hours daily training, your performance level of this, 4 hours of this. So this is the process of a regression analysis. Secondary data analysis. Secondary data analysis is the process of analyzing the data that has already been collected by the other researcher, organization and all these. In this method, researcher use existing information instead of the collecting of new. The source of secondary data may include just like we collect the books, newspaper, government report, survey, record, etc. It is helpful to save time, effort, research, cost, because we already the information is available. You just do some effort to collect the information. The secondary data analysis is useful to identify the trend, relationship and pattern, but important thing is existing information. So researcher carefully examine and interpret the available data, and next important thing to answer the research problem. Here the differences, how to differentiate between the descriptive and analytical research. In analytical research, the researcher mainly use existing data and previous research finding. The researcher studies clearly or already available information from the book, report, journal and record. But other hand, the experimental research mainly use the new data collect through the experiment and control group. So this is the descriptive research and analytical research. So descriptive research generally used for the existing situation, current situation. Here analyze the interpret the data. Of analytical research, we collect the information, existing information, but analytical research analyze the existing information. It's focus on what is happening, but analytical research to find out the questions the reason of what is happening, just like the focus on why it is happening. And next is the use of survey and observation in the descriptive research, generally collecting the information. Descriptive research is that it is focused on what is happening in a particular situation. This means researchers try to describe the current condition, behavior, attitude, event, or activities as they exist in a real life without changing any kind of the variables. In descriptive research, the researcher observed the collect the information to understand the present situation. The main aims to describe the fact. But in the case of analytical research, is use statistical and logical analysis. For what? To find out the answer of why. This means the researcher carefully studies data using the statistics, logical thinking to understand the relationship, pattern, meaningful and hidden informations. The important thing is no need of interpretation. In the descriptive research, no required any kind of interpretation of result, just to establish the fact or current situation. So descriptive research mainly describe fact in a current situation. It does not deeply analyze, find out the cause and hidden meaning. The researcher report what is happening rather than the why it's happening. But important thing to involve the critical evaluation, just like we go for the analytical research, use statistical process. Analytical research carefully examine, evaluate the information in logical way. The researcher compare the fact, identify the relationship and analyze the finding deeply. So it's helped to understand the strength, weakness and meaning of data. Next thing is, here we discuss about the analytical research, but important thing is the importance of analytical research in the field of physical education and sports sciences. The first important thing is to evaluate the sport performance data. The analytical research help the researcher to carefully examine the sport performance record and result. Analytical research also helpful to identify the strength, weakness, what type of pattern is going on, and area for improvement in the performance. These find out and then we go for work on that and enhance the performance. Analytical research also helpful to researcher generally use in that type of research as statistical and logical analysis. Important thing is to understand the athlete progress, performance trend. For example, the research analyze the athlete just like the match statistics and fitness score. Important things to evaluate their performance improvement over a season. Next important thing is they analyze the trend. This is the helpful in the field of physical education and their outcome. This is the important of analytical research in the field of physical education. So analytical research help the researcher just like they study and examine the effectiveness of different training programs through which we can find out which training program is effective. Analytical research also help to identify whether a training method improve performance, fitness or skill. And researcher also analyze the result and outcome on the program using the data and logical interpretation. Next important thing is analytical research. The importance in the field of physical education is just like we go for the physiological response to exercise, biomechanical response to exercise, psychological response to the exercise, because the physical activity is an effect on different parameters, which means how the body's physiological responses to the exercise, how bodies your work in a different exercise, how your psychologies change in a different situation with the different type of exercise. Can the exercise an effect of your psychological parameters? Can you improve your physical performance with the help of changes in the psychological parameters? So all these things come under the play a very important role in the field of physical education, and they will show as the analytical research importance in the field of physical education. Next is the improve sports training coaching strategies. The analytical research help the coaches, researcher to identify the effectiveness. For what? The effectiveness of method, effectiveness of coaching, effectiveness of training. It also helps the athlete to perform through a better planning and scientific analysis. The researcher study the performance data and training outcome to develop more effective coaching strategies. Just like we giving a simple example, a coach analyze player performance. First we find out the performance and analyze and record it. Main purpose is to design better training program session for improving the speed or endurance. Next important thing, the what kind of advantage of analytical research. Number one is this is the provide the deep understanding of relationship. So analytical research help the researcher especially help in the understanding the or relationship between the different variable or different kind of the factors. Analytical advantage of analytical research is also carefully examine the data to identify the pattern, connection between the variable and possible causes and possible outcome. And this also helpful in gaining the detailed and meaningful understanding of research problem. To be giving a simple example, just like a researcher studies the relationship between the regular exercise and physical fitness among the students. So to find out the relationship with the help of an analytical research, this is a very important advantage. The next advantage of analytical research is it helps in testing theories and hypotheses. Because analytical research helps the researcher to examine whether a theory or hypothesis is correct or not, because it's based on existing information. The researcher analyze existing data and evidence to support the reject or accept the hypothesis. So it also helpful in developing this scientific understanding and an accurate conclusion from the available resources and available of data. We giving a simple of another example, just like the research analyze fitness data to test the hypothesis that the regular exercise improve muscular endurance. So this is a simple example of help of advantage of analytical research in the testing of theories and hypotheses. Next is support the evidence-based decision making. The research is very important, especially in the field of physical education. Research is scientific process, research is planned process, and next most important thing is through the researcher we reach any conclusion, but this conclusion is based on evidences. So analytical research help the researcher to make the decision based on fact, based on data, based on evidences. So decisions are made through the proper analysis rather than the or assumption, personal opinion. So this is the very important advantage of analytical research in the field of physical education. It's improve accuracy and reliability of concluding and conclusion and planning, analysis and all these things. Next is the very important advantage of analytical research, useful for policy development in sports sciences. So analytical research provides the scientific information that help in developing the effective sport policies and program. It also helpful for the authorities and organization make better decision for athletic development, physical education development and sport development. So research findings supports in planning and improving in sports sciences and physical education. The important thing is, this is the analytical research play a very important role in the field of physical education and sports in relation to policy development and especially in the field of physical education and sports. In the conclusion, in the last, my dear learner, analytical research plays a very vital role in advancing knowledge in physical education and sports sciences. Just like unlike the descriptive research, its goal beyond simply describing the fact and focus on analyzing, interpreting and explaining the relationship between the variables in the current situation. Through its systematic method and use of statistical and logical reasoning, it helps in understanding the performance, evaluating the training program and improving the decision making. By the applying of analytical research, the teacher, coach, rehabilitation experts, researcher can develop more effective strategies and evidence-based practices in the field of physical education, especially in sports. So therefore, it is an essential approach for making physical education more scientific, more practical and performance-based or performance-oriented. So thank you very much, my dear learner.